Hey everybody, this is now what it looks like to walk into my fish room. So this is the second update on my progress I'm making. Last we saw it was basically a tank sitting on the table, and I had some good ideas to bring in some plants from the outdoors and really dress it up and make it look really nice and kind of disguise the tank in the middle of all that. So I did a pretty good job. Probably won't stay like this. This was maybe 4.5 hours worth of work. I just had fun and went to town and just kept going in and out, in and out. Everything you see here is from the yard. Not necessarily native to this area, but out of our gardens or some of our potted plants. I took some cuttings and I even, ripped moss right off the ground. So we have bare patches in the yard where I pilfered some moss. But we got all kind of good stuff going on here, and we'll take a little walk around and have a look at it as though it's a yard tour. But again, this is probably not going to be specifically how it stays. And as far as the plants go, that will change all the time, just like any area of my house where I have a bright south-facing window, or I have another one of these panels, or some other sort of LED or something. I've got a bunch of different plants clustered under it, and depending on the season, the time of year, just whether it's a flowering plant or not, it moves and changes. My gardens do that outside. So this area will probably morph and change quite a bit, but there are some general themes I would like to stick with. One of them being the sort of water feature theme. Now, if you haven't noticed already, we sort of get the effect of water flowing up here, and then you get the water sort of trickling down here. I put the crab tank down here on the ground rather than behind the other tank. It simply wouldn't have gotten enough light, and I really like the way it looks down there. We're going to have issues with the crabs getting out of the tank. I already know that. I have had a crab get out. I thought it was gone when I went to move this daylily here. The crab was actually on the little tray that the planter is sitting in. So I was able to get the crab back in its tank, and I do have a piece of plexiglass that I've been putting over top of it. I did remove it for the sake of this video because it's really unsightly, and as far as putting the original piece of plexiglass back on there, that wouldn't work at all. I would have to move it out from underneath the edge of the table, and it's just obviously it would be very unsightly. If I have any plants hanging down or growing from the edges, then that gives I may as well just put a rope ladder in there for the crabs to climb out on. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with the crab tank. I might find a good home for the crabs. That's still kind of up in the air. What I did do to the tank, though, is I pulled some of the Nubius out of my T-bar tank, and I pulled some Java Fern out of my bucket in the other room that I've got tons of Java Fern. Remember, I've always got Aquatic Plants For Sale. Check my email in the description below. And I filled it up with a lot more water. I put more rocks in there. I gave the crabs more land. But we have more water and more water flow because of the greater depth of water. The pump doesn't have to pump the water up so high. And we get a more vigorous flow, which ties right into the flow up here. Now my 60-gallon tank equivalent filter has showed up, my Whisper 60. Again, I don't know how many gallons per hour it moves. It's just designed supposedly for up to a 60-gallon tank. It does have a valve on it where I can control the flow and I can turn it up or down. So in the same way, well, let me not get ahead of myself here. We'll talk about that in a second. Right now, you can see how we've got a little bit of a water flow coming in, and then down here, you've got a little more water flow. There's nothing in between, but if you don't pay too much attention, look too hard, it sort of deceives the eye into thinking this really is sort of a waterfall from the top down into the bottom. So that's the effect I'm going for there. This sweet potato vine here can grow right up out of the water. I can do all sorts of stuff with this. I can put it in the filter or whatever. Right now I just have it sitting back there so it stays in the light. That eventually is going to be trained along this front edge here, so it sort of breaks up this thick black line right in the middle of our line of view. I'm also going to be able to have I got water sprite in there now, but I can do some of this creeping Jenny or something else in the bigger filter. I can leave the lid off and have plants growing out of it. I can put the lid on and put a planter on top of it and have stuff growing either up and out or down and hanging over it. And then, of course, once we get into the tank, I got all sorts of options I can do with that. The fact that we're going to have two sources of water flowing in, I can have, what I think I'm going to do is a rock shelf on one side to create a splashing, waterfall type effect, and then just have the other side plunging either straight in or possibly have some plants growing in front of the filter so that, we get the sort of effect that we're getting here with the water flowing across, the leaves and down into the water and that sort of thing, maybe even flowing across the surface. So we'll see. I got lots of ideas on what I can do with that. So we've got some creeping Jenny and some moss. This is just a little market pack that it's got the 6 things, and I just basically stuck it right over the side there. And that creeping Jenny will grow in so fast you won't even know that there's a market pack under there. It'll just be a big bushy green, it'll look like a big green flowing mass right there. And then, of course, we've got another little market pack sitting in this tray. I've got some more creeping Jenny. I've got hosta, fern. I'm sorry, not fern. I always call this fern. Moss. These are just some rocks set across the edge. Again, some moss from the yard. That moss will probably dry out more than it is already. It'll retain its greenish color to some degree. If I spritzed it and misted it with water, it would stay alive and stay a much greener coloration. But I don't really care. This moss is the same as this moss, same species, and you can see how pale green it gets once it dries out, and if it stays moist, it stays nice and green like this. This is a different species of moss altogether, and this will stay green because I've got it, sitting on soil, not sitting on the table down here. Again, this is probably not permanent. This tank's probably going to get moved further back now that I've decided not to put the crab tank back here. My iris finished blooming. I actually went ahead and deadheaded that. Back here, all we've got so far is just some really rudimentary plantings. I just shoved some stuff in some planters. That's not necessarily permanent yet. You can see the hosta's still got bare roots exposed on it. So they will get planted more thoroughly and better when my planters arrive. I've ordered some 5-gallon cloth planters, so they'll be like a dark matte material that you won't even notice. And instead of like these big hostas back here that right now are simply sitting in buckets and sitting on buckets, I'll be able to do something a little better with that. So even from this angle, you still get a look at the tank. You can see right in and see if there was some fish swimming around in there, you'd be able to see in. Of course, I don't know with the bigger filter if that'll be the case. And again, this isn't necessarily permanent, but this really was able to get my creative juices flowing. I had a lot of fun with this. Again, it took me all afternoon. I started just after lunchtime, and it was probably pushing 6 o'clock in the evening by the time I was winding down, and I thought this was a good sort of stopping place. But I've got enough room to kind of get around it everywhere I go so far. And again, remember, this is all very plastic. I can move this and change it all around, but so far it gives you a pretty good look at what I mean by having a nice little island of vegetation in the middle of the room. And I think it looks pretty good from all angles. You can't see too many of the nuts and bolts in there. And again, this is just my let's slap something together just so I can get an idea of how this looks and where can we go from here. Over time, a lot of this will change. Stuff like this, little dead nettles here, probably won't stay there. That's just too easy to get knocked over. I'll have to water it all the time. It's in a tiny little planter, so it'll dry out very quickly. The more plants I have, the more transpiration is going to occur. Transpiration is the process by which plants draw moisture from the soil and then it evaporates off the leaves. It's sort of like a cross between evaporation and perspiration, and that's how plants put humidity in the air. That's how we get nice humid atmospheres around the woods and parks and stuff like that. So I'm probably going to get more moisture dumped in the atmosphere down here in my basement from the plants and all of the surface area from all of these great big broad leaves than I am from the open top tanks and the water flowing and everything else. These plants are really going to humid up the room down here. I do have a dehumidifier. I generally don't run it though. It generally doesn't get humid enough that I really need to worry about it too much down here. Might have to start thinking about doing something like that. So I've got more of these dead nettles over here. These will sort of spring back. I know they're looking a little rough right now. This one in particular is looking a little rough, but they will spring back and they will create a nice flowing type effect, give us a nice little curtain sort of effect. This stone crop here, I've got tons and tons of this out in the yard. I couldn't find any of the other species of stone crop I have, but this stuff I have growing like a weed. It grows everywhere. So I'll be able to do stuff with that too. I can grow that right up directly out of the water. You know, I could have it in something along these lines to have it flow out. That stuff is what I'm thinking of in particular to have either in front of the filter and hanging down and, you know, on top of the filter and hanging over in front of it, or actually growing in the back of the filter and up and out. So I don't know, but that's where we stand right now. And I've got the filter, I've got some rocks collected up, so we're gonna, you know, start working on that tank proper today. And I'm going to leave everything else alone for now. I think the greenery and the plants and everything are going to stay the way they are for the time being, and I'm going to begin working directly on the tank. And once the tank is set up, you know, then we can go from there and maybe make some more changes and movements and stuff. But after this will probably be the last sort of behind the scenes look. Once I get the tank set up with the big filter and everything on it, we will probably have the big reveal video coming up in a couple days. It'll be this weekend. So that was pretty much my process. I spent one day getting this together, and then whatever the final product is going to be is, you know, what I do from here on out this afternoon. So probably figure another, you know, few hours down here tinkering, just having some fun with the music on, and we'll see where we go from here. So thanks for watching, and make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss any of the updates on this or anything else I got going on. This should be a lot of fun to see how this turns out. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.